Pete, thanks for holding on with us. Let's go ahead and get right into it. The first thing, and probably the most controversial thing, has been the kids' table comment.
Yeah.
And you talk about someone being in what's called the pre-contemplative stage, meaning they won't even consider the fact that they could be wrong. And I'll be honest with you, I'll be completely upfront with you. When I saw your talk in Dallas, or one of your talks in Dallas, I saw that when you said that, you said in the pre-contemplative stage, they're not ready for the adult table yet. They need to go sit at the kids' table. When you said that,
Yeah.
I immediately disagreed with that, but I still got a lot out of the presentation. But when we talked yesterday and you explained it more in depth, I understood what you said, and then my disagreement only went to the use of words, because I agree with you conceptually. So take this platform right now to explain what you meant by being at the kids' table versus being at the adult table.
Okay, so that I talked about in the talk that you saw, and it's also in page 212 and 213 in my book. I just looked it up when you're here. So what the kids' table is, and I've spoken about this publicly before, in the book I specifically talk about it in relation to a number of things. One of those things is a voice in public policy. And if somebody, to sit at the adult table, one can sit at the adult table if one, this is from my book, has evidence in support of the position. Absent evidence, the claimant needs to go to the kids' table. And I give the examples of homosexuals. Some people think that homosexuals, I'm not reading the book now, it's the examples in the book, shouldn't be allowed to adopt children because they're more likely to beat them. But that's an empirical claim, right? So we can turn the tools of science and look at that claim. So even if that conclusion is reprehensible to us or it doesn't comport with our worldview, that's an adult table claim. We can look at the evidence for that, and people demand that their voices must be heard. But when someone waives an ancient text and they expect others to cede to its authority, well, that's a problem. It's a problem because when you talk about public policy, you need to talk about reason and evidence for the things that one believes. I also want to say that I'm pretty specific in the book for right here, on 283, 284, the adult table metaphor is best used with leaders of faith communities who are accustomed to deference. If blah, blah, continued failure to produce evidence should be met with, you're pretending to know things you don't know, go to the kids' table. This is a conversation for adults. So I do not say that in interventions, which I think is your second point. I do not say that to the average churchgoer.
Right. So what I want to clarify, what really stood out to me during our private conversation when I asked you about this, that it's more about public policy. If you come to the table and say, I want to have a say in some laws that help govern our people, but I have a unique take on it, meaning gays should not be able to get married, or gays should be allowed to get married, or whatever your stance may be, you at least need to have some form of evidence to be taken seriously. If your only evidence is, I believe in magic, God talks to me directly, you don't get to have a say in public policy. And
so
that concept I agree with.
Yeah, that's right. Look, in order to, and this is pretty standard in the critical thinking literature, and maybe folks are less familiar with that, your listeners are less familiar with that body of peer-reviewed scholarship, but they're probably more familiar with Sam Harris's Moral Landscape, which talks about this. So in order for that to mean anything, in order for critical thinking to mean anything at all, some voices must be excluded from the discourse, right? Some opinions have to be wrong. So what does that mean for an opinion to be wrong? Some people's opinions don't even rise to the level of being wrong. And so our first step is we need to talk about... Huh?
I said that's an important point. I want you to spend some time on that. Some people's opinions don't even rise to the level of being wrong.
Yeah.
Elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, there are many instances of that. If I say to you, Mambo dogfish to the banana patch, that's just an incoherent utterance. That's not wrong. That's just, or if I say the present king of America is bald, that's just gibberish, right? I mean, it's not gibberish. It's not like if I say to you, that's just gibberish. And so if...
I'm quoting that.
I was going to practice. I try to speak Chinese. I don't speak very well, but I was going to say something in Chinese. But that would have actually meant something.
Yeah.
So, and then you get words that have reference to them, like king of America is bald, so we know what that means. But then we have these other class of things. We have people who make claims that can't be verified. So if you say, well, for example, use the example I use in the book, homosexuals shouldn't be allowed to adopt children. Well, why shouldn't they be allowed to adopt children? Well, or homosexuals, adoption children should be illegal. I mean, you have to formulate the exact proposition. Well, why shouldn't they be allowed to do that? Well, it's disgusting. Okay, so that's an appeal that somebody has based upon a subjective experience, right? So, I mean, the best way to think about it is, I think I published a paper about this too. So, if I say to you, eating a plate of live maggots is disgusting, you would probably say yes, right?
Oh, yeah?
Okay, but you don't want to make that illegal. So that's not the real reason. The real reason is often because people have some it's their religious upbringing. They're told that in their church by their minister or their pastor or in their faith tradition. And so if somebody wants to bring evidence, then I think we need to seriously consider that evidence. As I said in the podcast in 2012, Philosophy News, I don't think that evidence exists. But if somebody wants to present that evidence, no matter how repugnant the conclusion is, we need to look at that. So if there actually is data, and I'm even hesitant to say this in the context of homosexuality and adopting children because somebody will think that there is data for this and there is no data, we need to look at it. It's not about the conclusions. It's about the process people use. And my whole book was about that. So when you talk about adult tables and children's tables, some voices from the conversation, and I'm not talking about voices in terms of a participatory democracy where people have a right to vote, and I'm also not talking about making something illegal. Look, you can't make hatred of homosexuals illegal any more than you can make hatred of, like, Samoans or blacks or Scandinavians illegal. It's not about that. It's about we need to demand that people bring evidence to the table in the formulation of public policy.
Even if it's wrong,
so
even if the evidence, but if the evidence is testable and science can deal with it, even if it's absurd, you're saying let them have a seat at the public policy adult table, so to speak, and then we can test their evidence and prove it wrong. But if you just come with a feeling,
or not.
then
or not. Okay. Maybe they're right. Right? Maybe there are higher incidents. I mean, maybe they're right, and if they're right or if they're wrong, we can then look at what the effect on public policy should be. But if people don't, if we don't demand that people bring that evidence, and we ask them repeatedly for evidence, it doesn't do any good to just sit there and tell them, well, what's your evidence? Give me your evidence. Give me your evidence. And they start talking about a vision from some angel, the Archangel Moroni, right? They have to sit at the children's table. We can't. That cannot affect public policy. We have to use the best available evidence. Look, we have some very, very, very serious problems. We have ecological problems. The problem in Iraq right now is a cluster. It is horrific. We need very serious, honest examinations of these problems, and we need to talk. First, we need to be honest about it, and then, George Bush was famous for having said the whole statement about having prayed about Iraq.
Yeah.
That's deeply disturbing to me. It's deeply disturbing because it means the belief is less likely to be revisable. Because if you think that God is telling you something, it's also deeply disturbing to me because many evangelicals were on board. Certainly not all evangelicals. So that is one purpose of the adult table, and the other in the kids table. And the other purpose is when I do deal with faith leaders, on occasion I will say that, and I'll say that not as a slur against them, but I'll say that as a matter-of-fact statement. Look, I've asked you to provide evidence for 15 minutes now, 10, however how many minutes, I usually wouldn't let it go on for 15 minutes. You have failed to provide evidence. Short of this, you have to you cannot be allowed to sit at the adult table. You cannot be allowed to have a voice in public policy decisions if this, given a failure to provide sufficient evidence to warrant beliefs that you have. That's not how participatory democracies ought to function.
No. Okay. All right. I'm right there on board with you. I understand. Personally, I wouldn't have used the words kids table because I understand. Yeah, sure. But let me just say, I wouldn't have used the words kids table because I understand how to the average reader that sounds dismissive, like you're patting them on the head and sending them off. But in a way, Maybe you are, because you're like, look, you don't even have evidence. You're not even providing anything for us to test. And so I understand the concept. I understand the people could see just a quote from that and be like, this guy wants to be rude to Christians, and that's not at all what you're about.
Okay, and that is exactly, that dovetails what you said before about what my difficulty is. The difficulty, this is very tricky to do. It is very tricky to be civil and forthright, and it is very tricky to not invoke someone's defensive posture. Now, that may invoke someone's defensive posture. That's more of a forthright statement. It's not meant to offend somebody, but if somebody gets offended by that, it's a consequence of the fact that they're not providing evidence. And sometimes we have to be very firm with people. We have to, and I write this in the book, we ask them repeatedly for their evidence, and at some point we just cannot entertain those speculations seriously. It is at that point counterproductive.